I'm Roy Wetherbee. I was Blue Book Regional Editor for New England, Region 1. I was that ASTA Area VP, Northeast Region VP for a period of time. I'm a past Lodge Advisor of Packagug Lodge 525, and I'm currently Advancement Chairman for Troop 114, Shrewsbury, Mass, in the heart of New England Council. I've been collecting since 1977 when I attended my first Jamboree, which was actually in Canada. And I've been focused on collecting New England OA since 1987 when Rob Cutts published his book. So we're going to be looking exclusively at Northeastern Connecticut here tonight. And currently Northeastern Connecticut has one active lodge. It was formed by the Chittani Lodge 10 was formed by the merger of Secaucus Lodge 10 and Elowac Lodge 59. These lodges merged in 1995. We'll see later in the presentation, the Secaucus Lodge, there's only one patch known to be associated with any chapter from that lodge. All the chapter issues, all the chapters that we'll be talking about tonight started with Elowac Lodge 59 and a few newer ones formed during the Chittani Lodge 10 era since 1996. Elowac Lodge, and we covered some of this in the last presentation, Elowac Lodge was formed by the charter of by the merger of 5 lodges: Kiatan Lodge 59, Matatuck Lodge 217, Wahungan Lodge 234, Tunxis Lodge 491, and Wapunkwik Lodge 558. And as we saw, it was a very fragmented merger. And those 5 lodges literally just became 5 chapters in the new lodge. And as one lodge member noted in the last presentation, they actually didn't even meet together for years as a lodge. We have these lodges. We have the chapters that formed later. We covered this last time, so I'll just skip ahead. So these were some of the original lodges that became chapters. And Kiatan Lodge simply became Kiatan chapter. Tunxis Lodge became Tunxis chapter. Wapunkwik Lodge became Wapunkwik chapter. And Matatuck Lodge became Matatuck chapter. All pretty, and you can see they totally kept their designs, they kept their traditions intact and just moved ahead as a chapter. So rather than trying to follow that somewhat that family tree of mergers, I'm just going to take all of these chapters in alphabetical order. So these are all the chapters with known issues listed alphabetically, and I'll take it from there. And the one exception here is the El-Jixon chapter has so many issues, I just couldn't fit it in this presentation. So I've got a couple of examples in there now, and I will include that in the next presentation because there's a lot here to cover, as you can see. So the first chapter here alphabetically is Kachipiani chapter. It formed as part of Elowac Lodge 59, and its earliest issues were these chapter neckerchiefs. Kachipiani was both a chapter and a Camp Kachipiani. This is their N1, and there are 2 slightly different versions, minor varieties with a light yellow and a dark yellow piping, but that's really the only difference there. Probably just a second run of this neckerchief, but this is the earliest piece from that chapter. Then they had this X1 patch, and I have 2 of them here just because these were made in such a way that everyone is a little bit different. So they're MVE really, but you can see, you know, minor differences because they were made one at a time. You know, some of the lettering is different. The X here on the tomahawk is quite different. Handmade varieties, not worthy of calling them an A or a B variety, but everyone's going to be a little bit different. And then they had these activity patches. They had the Kachipiani OA was involved with the Boy Power Orama in 1975. And then they were still promoting boy power, man power in 1976 with this kind of plastic leather-ish neckerchief slide. And then they started sponsoring spring camporees. So Nathan Hale was their district. And you can see the WWW is represented on pretty much every patch, but these are technically district event issues. And they just, they either had an OA service corps or perhaps they did their OA callouts at these events. And so it was designated on each of these patches. And you can see it jumps from 82 to 84. I've never seen an 83, but it's quite possibly out there. And then it's 85, 86. So a good chance that 83 exists as well. Again, district issues, but the chapter was associated with this district and was obviously participating in some meaningful way to be on these patches. Kachipiani changed its name to Catan, and I realized during the course of putting together this presentation that I didn't know exactly what date that change occurred. So we'll pick this up again when we get down to Catan chapter, because I'm really not sure on some of them which chapter it really was. So here is a Corsair chapter. This is actually the newest chapter in Shaitani Lodge 10. This patch was issued within just the past year, and I don't have it yet. It's very new, so I'm interested in picking up one of these chapter patches should they surface. And then El Jixon chapter, which is kind of my problem child, because this one chapter issued more chapter patches than the rest, certainly the rest of Connecticut combined. And, you know, there's no question that, you know, it issued the most in all of New England. This one here is their J1. The one I have is the only one I've ever seen. So it's actually one of the rarer El Jixon chapter issues. And looking at the progression, it's quite possibly the earliest. And then jumping to the latest, it started in Elawac Lodge 59, but El Jixon chapter clearly spilled over into Shaitani Lodge 10. They issued these patches in 2000 and were traded at the NOAC in 2000. So this would be the very latest El Jixon chapter issues, and two of maybe 3 or 4 that can be attributed to Shaitani Lodge 10 and not the Elawac version of this chapter. And I'll cover El Jixon in greater detail in the next presentation. So moving on to Kemosabe. Again, yeah, you see Kemosabe was one of those predecessor lodges, predecessor lodge names. The only Kemosabe chapter issues that we're aware of to date is this Kemosabe Arrowhead, Kemosabe chapter, Elawac Lodge 59, and this neckerchief, where it's talking about the 25th anniversary. I don't believe it's the 25th anniversary of the chapter. Well, it could be. It could be the 25th anniversary of the chapter. There was a possibility that they could have been referencing an anniversary of the lodge as well. But for Kemosabe chapter, this is all they wrote. One arrowhead patch, one neckerchief, that's all that's known. So then moving on to Keatan, and we saw the Keatan flap. The Keatan chapter flap was just the same as the Keatan Lodge F1. So here, in addition to the flap, they started again, like other chapters did, being involved or sponsoring or providing service at district events. So for Keatan chapter, they were with the Middlesex district, and they were involved with the Keatan 1979 winter weekend. There was a Keatan chapter all out for scouting weekend at Camp Tadman 1981. Not sure if there's anything that they sponsored or were involved with in 1980, but that's something to look for. And then moving on, we jump from 81 to 84, but here we have the Middlesex District Keatan chapter. very clear that the chapter was putting on these tribal games for the district. And then moving on to 85, the next year, Kiatan chapter was clearly involved with the Klondike that winter. And then continuing the theme in 1987, the Kiatan chapter sponsored an Indian lore spring camporee. 1990, they had the Kiatan fall camporee, and those are both Illiwack Lodge. Now, Shaitani Lodge 10 formed in 1996, and there are one here with the red border pretty clearly says Shaitani Lodge 10 on it. This Kiatan chapter patch Airman Recruiter, however, is undated, and it's of a manufacturer style that I believe it could have been earlier than Shaitani Lodge 10. It could have continued beyond the merger as well. I'm not sure there. That's why I have it positioned before what we have listed as the R1. But I'm not 100% sure on the date of the Airman Recruiter Award. But moving on, they sponsored a spring camporee in 1997 for their district. Really dark motif, black lettering on a dark background. So not very easy to see. But 97 would have been 1 year after the merger. And then by 2002, a little easier to read. Again, they were involved with the Middlesex District Fall Camporee in 2002. Now in 2001, the chapter held a series of work weekends to work on the ceremonies ring. And as I understand it, and I don't know the dates of these or the order, and I'm not sure anyone else does at this point in time either, but they had 4 different work weekends for working on cleaning up, rebuilding, or repairing their ceremonies ring for their chapter ceremonies. And they had 4 different borders, one for each of those weekends, to encourage people to go and to come back. And then finally here we have another fall camporee, Kiatan chapter with the WWW. The flash on the camera kind of hid the fact that there's a light blue background and a dark blue background variety, pretty minor variety. And then here, we're moving on to Kiatan chapter. And this district's chapter prior to renaming itself Kiatan chapter was Kachipiani chapter. And we talked about them earlier in the presentation. But to be honest, none of these have the chapter name on them. So 89, 90, not sure if there's something for 91, and then there's 92. So by 92, they had clearly changed their name. I kept these just because these were in series. I kept them together. But I'm not sure if Kachipiani actually lasted as late as 89 or 90. Something I need to look into. And then again, Nathan Hale District, at this point, we're still Kiatan chapter. The Order of the Arrow is again noted here, but again, I consider this a district event patch. And the Order of the Arrow with the 3 W's here is noted again for what I assume, if this was the spring camporee, I assume the other was a fall camporee. And there is one more patch in this series that is undated. And I don't have a picture here of it because I don't have it. It's a need for me. But I do keep an eye out for Nathan Hale District items just in case something with an OA attribution, or not attribution, but designation pops up. And then finally, there are these. And again, these are undated. They're Connecticut River. Actually, it's Connecticut Rivers Council at this point. So I should change this notation. These are definitely Shaitani Lodge 10 for the Kiatan chapter. And then moving on to Mattatuck chapter, again, one of those original 5 lodges that merged in 1972 to form Illilouette Lodge. And they have just an R1. And then they had this anniversary patch produced in 1992. And that 1942 date is paying homage to Mattatuck Lodge, not Mattatuck chapter. These are the only 2 patches issued by this chapter. And so we can move on to Metacomet chapter. And this is not Oklahoma. This does actually correspond, however, to a map of the towns in that district. The Metacomet chapter X1 is found loose, and it's also found on neckerchiefs. And I'm just showing it here on the neckerchief. That's their earliest issue. It's fairly uncommon. And then moving on, they had a 5th anniversary patch that they issued in 1982. And this first one has really kind of light coloring and a gray border. It's hard to see here. It's a gray border, not a silver mylar border. And this first one is considered an error. And then the one on the right with the silver mylar border and the somewhat darker, better contrasting colors is considered their X1. And then moving on, they changed up the patch a little bit later on. Again, you can still see the map of the towns in the district with the first letter of each town name. Pretty clearly Metacomet district, also Metacomet OA chapter. And then in 1987, they issued a 10-year anniversary patch. Metacomet chapter, it's still Illilouette Lodge 59. They formed in 77. This patch, it's important to pay attention to what's on the patch because they actually reissued this patch for their 20th anniversary as well. So if you have a 10-year cheerful service with nothing in the corners, you've got a legitimate 10th anniversary patch for Metacomet chapter. But moving on, for their 20th anniversary, they issued a set, and it was a set of 4 patches. So this 1992 15th year anniversary was something of a fantasy patch. They never issued a 15th anniversary patch. They simply made it so they could add it to the 5, 10, 15, 20 anniversary set. So the 15th anniversary, the 20th anniversary patch, and then a reissued 5th anniversary and 10th anniversary with a little 20 in the lower right corner to let people know that they're not from the original issue. These were, at that point, the last issues of this chapter. So now I'm moving on to Mohegan chapter. And the earliest piece we have here, referencing in some way the OA, is Mohegan District of Indian Trails Council. So this was actually issued, at an OA involved fall camporee when it was still Sasakis Lodge 10. And then when Chautauqua Lodge 10 formed later on, Mohegan chapter carried over, and this is their R1. And these are the only 2 Mohegan chapter issues that are currently documented. And so here's one that we discussed a little bit in the last presentation, but it wasn't pictured. So the original Wapunkwak chapter, which we'll talk about in a little bit, broke up in like 1976. And this chapter was formed, and it existed for only 1 year, and they issued this one fall fellowship patch. So you can see Illilouette 59, Nutmeg chapter. It's the only patch issued by this chapter, and the chapter existed for just 1 year. Moving on to Kudawitu chapter, which is actually one of my favorites. It was a really tiny chapter with just a couple of towns. This chapter, the patches all say 76 on it. And if you blow it up, this little chapter train patch has a little 76 on the TP as well. There is an earlier version of these that has a yellow 75 in the corner. And so even though they designate 76 on all of these patches, I wonder if the versions with the 75 on it were some form of organizing committee or something like that. I don't have it, so that's a need for me. So any Kuda-We-2 patch with the yellow 75 in place of the fleur-de-lis is something I'm looking for. They also issued these in Ordeal, Brotherhood, and Vigil versions. I don't have the Vigil version either. I don't even have a good picture of it, but I have seen it. I do know it exists. Again, that's something that I'm looking for and would be really interested if it turned up. And then finally, this little chapter train segment I picked up just a couple years ago. It was in, just a big patch bin at a tradery in Connecticut. And I pulled it out and I'm looking at it, chapter trained. You don't see chapter patches that often. And then when I looked really closely and saw a little white 76 on a TP, I kind of knew what it was. And it pretty clearly fits right under these dome-shaped patches that this chapter had. And it was, totally unknown. It just popped up in a junk box. And so you never know what turns up at a tradery. But I was pretty excited to find that. And of course, this was Illiwack Lodge, not Chautauqua Lodge that early. And so this is a little later. So those earlier patches were from the 70s. These patches came out in the 80s. They're more computer designed. They're on twill. There are, twill varieties, if you collect such a thing, twill left, twill right varieties on this patch. These were pretty common in the day. The first run had this really tiny Illiwack 59 above the Indian Chief. This other one had Illiwack 59 in much more visible letters. And then they had a couple of jacket patches. So again, this jacket patch on the left was very much like other jacket patches from the late 70s. Standard design, but also made in the Far East, because you can tell by the uneven letters. And then later on, this nice Swiss embroidered patch came out. Kuda-We-2, Order of the Arrow. And these are both standard 6-inch jacket patches. This one on the left, I've only, I think, ever seen 2 or 3. They're pretty scarce. The one here on the right, there's a really overpriced one on eBay right now if you really want it, but it's much more common. So moving on to Tunx's chapter. This is again one of the lodges that just took their lodge flap and put chapter on it. This is the only thing that they issued. So pretty easy one to find, though it's fairly scarce because this was around just those first few years of the new lodge, and then this chapter, merged into or became one of those other chapters that we discussed. So finally, alphabetically, we have Wapunkwik Lodge, and this is another one where they took the design of their neckerchief patch and they just changed lodge to chapter, but here they messed up and they forgot to change lodge to chapter. So the first patch that this chapter actually issued was an error. It said Wapunkwik Lodge, Illiwack Lodge, and then it was corrected to Wapunkwik Chapter, Illiwack Lodge. And these can be found both off the neckerchief and on the neckerchief. So on the neckerchief, it would be a white neckerchief with a standard black piping. And then they also took their original Lodge 558 flap and they redid it as a simply Wapunkwik, changed the 58 to 59 and called it a day. So these are out there as well. And then this is the only other Wapunkwak chapter patch that we're aware of. It was a spring fellowship. It's not dated, but technically this chapter only existed for 4 years. So it certainly was issued during this time frame sometime. So that is it, except for El Jixon. And El Jixon has just a ton of stuff, and new stuff is turning up all the time. We turned up a couple of new neckerchiefs that no one knew about at a tradery just a couple months ago. This is a hat pin from 1982 that I've been looking for quite a long time. So if anyone has this hat pin, I'm definitely interested in it. I actually have the pin pattern, the die pattern from the factory that made them, but I don't have an example of the pin. So if anyone has this pin, reach out to me. And thank you.
I thought I caught you mentioning in one of the patches that the lettering was from the east as opposed to a better one that was Swiss embroidered.
Right. So this patch that I'm displaying right here is Swiss embroidered. It's the type of loom. I believe it was called a Shifley loom that all the patch manufacturers used. 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They typically had a minimum order of 200 because these looms were, and I imagine they were made in Switzerland because everyone called them Swiss looms. But they were set up to make large orders. They would make 200 at a time. They would actually make 220 at a time. They would overrun by 10% so that if there were any errors that they had to cull out and throw away, they could still fill the order of 200. Going back, so these are all Swiss. I'm going to just try to go back. That's the classic Lion Brothers Swiss embroidery there. But here you can see how the letters are all uneven. They're not standard. This Kudawitu is actually computer designed. So there was a computer program that made everyone just they're very sharp details, and they're all very clear, well made, and they're all the same. And here's one where, because of this kind of funky lettering, that every one of these you find is going to be just a little bit different. These are Swiss. These are Swiss. I go back. These are both what they call computer designed, because you see that kind of segmented background you have in the background. That's very typical of computer designed type patches. That's computer designed. But this, and I'm not sure I can zoom in on this, but again here, these were made in the Far East, and they were made in a low volume manner. So you have things with uneven lettering. The lettering's not straight. The letters aren't even. And if I had a second one of these, you would see differences, distinct differences. There might be different details because they were made like one at a time. Computer designed is the norm nowadays, and computer designed patches seem to become more popular, towards the late 80s and certainly throughout the 90s and since. See, these were made at the same time, and yet because they were made individually, you see like this R and this R are different shapes. This X on the tomahawk is completely different from this one over here. Here's a case where the arrow extends all the way to the border on this one. The S is different shape on each of these. Made part of the same loom, because this lodge only did one loom of this patch. But these, you could send a design to a patch company in Asia, Hong Kong or Taiwan or Malaysia or one of those places, and they would make patches in small volumes. And when you see this kind of inconsistencies in the style of manufacture, they were done in small volumes, because they would do them on a larger machine if they needed to do larger volumes. So they're difficult, and I've been collecting OA since '87. I don't know if Rob Cutts is on the call, but in 1992 or 93, or it might have been a little later than that, but in the late 90s, he sold me his entire New England chapter collection, 36 of which were needs, and all were, killer. So
thank goodness you got him.
that was it. We combined my already pretty decent collection with his, original New England collection. And so at this point, there's not too much out there that I know I need, but new stuff is turning up every single day.